High Ambassador Veltoran stood before the tall windows of the Galactic Council chamber and watched the stars turn slowly beyond the glass. His forearms were folded behind his back in the traditional pose of deep thought. The message on his datapad was simple. The humans wanted him to visit their military academy on Earth. They called it a gesture of friendship between species. Veltoran made a sound that his species used for mild amusement. The humans had only been traveling between stars for 300 years. His own people, the Kirashi, had been building their empire for 12,000 years. What could humans possibly show him that would be worth his time? His chief advisor, a younger Kirashi named Tomel, approached with quiet steps. "Ambassador, shall I prepare a polite refusal?" "No," Veltoran said after a moment of thought. "I will go. The Council wants better relations with Earth, and this costs us nothing but a few days of travel." Tomel's skin shifted to a pale blue color that showed his surprise. "You wish to visit Earth personally? I could send a junior diplomat." Veltoran turned from the window. His ancient eyes, which had seen the rise and fall of 3 different galactic powers, looked tired but curious. "I have never visited a human world. Perhaps it is time I understood these creatures better. They expand so quickly. They breed so fast. The Council is nervous about them. With respect, Ambassador, the humans are not a threat. They are children compared to us. Children with nuclear weapons and colony ships," Veltoran replied. "Children who went from riding animals to walking on their moon in less than 100 years. Children who fight each other constantly and somehow grow stronger from it." He picked up the datapad and read the invitation again. "No, Tomel. I think I should see these humans for myself." The journey to Earth took 6 days in hyperspace. Veltoran spent most of that time reading reports about humanity. The information was strange and sometimes confusing. Humans lived for less than a century on average. They needed to sleep for a third of each day. They could only breathe certain mixtures of gases. Their bodies were soft, easily damaged, and healed slowly. And yet they had conquered their entire solar system in just 2 centuries. They had survived 2 events that nearly destroyed their species completely. They had built weapons capable of burning their own planet to ash and somehow decided not to use them. The reports called humans resilient and adaptable, but Veltoran sensed that these words did not capture the full truth. When his ship entered Earth's solar system, Veltoran stood at the observation deck and watched the small blue planet grow larger. It looked peaceful from space. White clouds swirled over blue oceans and green continents. Nothing about it suggested danger. A human vessel approached to escort them to the orbital station. Veltoran noticed that the ship was armed with weapons that seemed too large for its size. When he asked about this, his pilot simply said, "All human ships carry weapons, Ambassador. Even their cargo vessels." "Why? Are their space lanes dangerous?" "No, Ambassador. The humans simply believe that any ship might need to fight at any moment. They consider this normal." Veltoran found this strange but said nothing. The orbital station was enormous. Veltoran had seen many space stations in his long life, but this one surprised him with its size and complexity. Thousands of humans moved through its corridors. Ships of all sizes docked and departed constantly. Everywhere he looked, he saw movement and activity. A human woman waited for him at the docking bay. She wore a uniform covered in small symbols that Veltoran's translator identified as military ranks and achievements. Her hair was gray, and her face showed the lines of age, but her eyes were sharp and alert. "High Ambassador Veltoran," she said with a small bow. "I am Colonel Sarah Chen. I will be your guide during your visit to West Point Military Academy." Veltoran extended one of his smaller arms in the human gesture of greeting. "Thank you, Colonel. I hope this visit will help our species understand each other better." Colonel Chen smiled. It was a warm expression, but Veltoran noticed something else in her eyes, something that looked almost like sadness. "I believe it will, Ambassador. I believe it will change many things for you." At the time, Veltoran did not understand what she meant. They took a shuttle down to the planet's surface. Veltoran watched through the window as they descended through the atmosphere. The land below was covered with cities that spread across the continents like growing organisms. Roads and rails connected everything. Even from high altitude, he could see the constant movement of vehicles and aircraft. "Your species builds quickly," he observed. "We don't have much time," Colonel Chen replied. "A human life is short. If we want to accomplish anything, we must work fast. Does this not exhaust you? The colonel considered the question. Sometimes, but we rest when we are dead, Ambassador. While we live, we build, we create, we push forward. It is simply our nature. The shuttle landed on a wide field of grass surrounded by old stone buildings. Veltorin stepped onto human soil for the first time. The gravity was slightly stronger than he preferred, but manageable. The air smelled of plants and water and something else he could not identify. Later, he would learn that the smell was called rain. Welcome to West Point, Colonel Chen said. This academy has trained human military officers for over 400 years. Some of our greatest leaders walked these same paths when they were young. Veltorin looked at the buildings with their strange architecture. They were made of gray stone and seemed designed to last for centuries. Young humans in matching uniforms walked between buildings in organized groups. Their movements were precise and coordinated. They move like machines, Veltorin said. They are learning discipline, the colonel explained. A soldier must control their body before they can control a battlefield. This is the first lesson. And what is the last lesson? Colonel Chen did not answer immediately. She looked at the young cadets with an expression that mixed pride with something darker. When she finally spoke, her voice was quiet. The last lesson, Ambassador, is how to keep fighting when everything tells you to stop. When your body is broken, when your friends are dead, when hope is gone. The last lesson is how to make your death cost the enemy more than they are willing to pay. Veltorin felt the first small touch of unease. It was like a cold finger pressing against the base of his skull. He told himself he was being foolish. These were just humans. Short-lived, fragile, primitive humans. He had no idea how wrong he was. The morning sun cast long shadows across the academy grounds as Colonel Chen led Veltorin toward the first building on their tour. Cadets stopped and saluted as they passed. Veltorin noticed that every young human looked at him with curiosity but no fear. This surprised him. On most worlds, his species inspired at least some nervousness. The Kirashi hegemony controlled over 200 star systems. Their economic power could crush entire civilizations. But these young humans simply looked at him the way they might look at an interesting animal. This is the War Studies building, Colonel Chen announced as they entered a large stone structure. Here, our cadets learn the history and theory of armed conflict. The interior was cool and filled with the soft glow of holographic displays. Veltorin followed the colonel through a series of rooms, each dedicated to a different aspect of military education. In the first room, he found something that confused him immediately. A group of cadets sat in a circle, studying a holographic map of an ancient battlefield. Their instructor, a serious man with scars on his hands, was explaining how a small force of human warriors had faced an army many times their size. The defenders had known they would die. They fought anyway and held their position for 3 days. This battle happened over 4,000 years ago, the instructor was saying. The defenders all died, every single one, but their sacrifice gave their allies time to prepare. That is the lesson here. Sometimes victory is not about surviving. Sometimes victory is about what your death accomplishes. Veltorin listened with growing discomfort. You teach your young to seek death? Colonel Chen shook her head. We teach them that death is not the worst outcome. Failure is worse. Betraying their comrades is worse. Giving up when others depend on them is worse. Death with purpose has meaning. Death without purpose is tragedy. They moved to another room where cadets analyzed a different battle. This one was more recent, from a war that happened on Earth just a few centuries ago. The holographic display showed a frozen city surrounded by enemy forces. The defenders had no food. They had little ammunition. The temperature was cold enough to kill an unprotected human in minutes. The siege lasted over 2 years, a cadet explained to his classmates. More than 1 million civilians died from hunger and cold. But the city never surrendered. The defenders ate leather. They ate wallpaper paste. They ate things I cannot describe in polite company. And they kept fighting. Why? Another cadet asked. Why not surrender and save lives? The first cadet's expression grew hard. Because surrender would have meant extermination. The enemy planned to kill everyone regardless. So the defenders chose to die on their feet rather than on their knees. They chose to make the enemy pay for every street, every building, every room. Veltorin's translator struggled with some of the concepts. The Kirashi language had no word for this kind of stubborn resistance. His people believed in logical choices. When defeat was certain, surrender preserved lives and resources. This was wisdom. This was civilization. But humans seemed to operate on different rules entirely. Colonel Chen guided him to the strategy hall, a vast room filled with interactive tactical displays. Here, senior cadets presented their graduation projects. Veltorin watched a young woman stand before a panel of instructors and explain her defensive plan for a theoretical scenario. "The enemy outnumbers us 15 to 1, she said calmly. "They have orbital superiority. They have better weapons. They have more supplies. We will lose. This is certain." One of the instructors nodded. "Continue. My plan does not focus on victory. It focuses on cost. We divide our forces into 17 independent cells. Each cell operates without central command. When one falls, the others continue. We poison water supplies before retreating. We collapse infrastructure. We turn every civilian building into a trap. We train the population to resist even after formal military forces are destroyed." The young woman's voice never wavered. She described horrors with the same tone someone might use to discuss the weather. "Conservative estimates suggest we can maintain active resistance for 6 years. Enemy casualties will exceed their initial invasion force by a factor of 3. The economic cost of occupation will exceed the value of anything they hope to gain. Eventually, they will leave. Not because we defeated them, but because we made staying too expensive." The instructors made notes. One of them asked, "And civilian casualties?" "High. Very high. But the alternative is complete subjugation. My plan gives the population a choice. They can flee before the invasion. Those who stay know the risks. Those who fight know the costs." Veltorin could not remain silent. "This is madness. You would destroy your own world rather than accept defeat?" The young cadet turned to look at him. Her eyes were calm and cold. "With respect, Ambassador, I would destroy everything I love rather than see it in the hands of an enemy. And I am not unusual. Every human in this academy would say the same. This is not madness. This is simply how we think." Colonel Chen touched Veltorin's arm gently. "Perhaps we should continue the tour." They walked through more rooms. Veltorin saw cadets studying naval warfare, aerial combat, siege tactics, guerrilla operations, psychological warfare, and something called total war that made his stomach turn. Every lesson seemed to carry the same underlying message. Humans expected to fight against terrible odds. They expected to lose, and they planned to make losing so painful for their enemies that victory would taste like ashes. In one small room, Veltorin found a display that stopped him completely. It showed a simple equation written in human script. His translator converted it. "If we must die, we will choose how. If we must lose, we will choose what it costs." "What is this?" he asked. "The Academy motto," Colonel Chen replied. "Every cadet memorizes it on their first day. It reminds them that even in the worst situations, they still have power. The power to decide what their sacrifice means." Veltorin stared at the words for a long time. He thought about his own people, who had built an empire through patience and negotiation. The Kirashi avoided war whenever possible. They considered violence to be a failure of diplomacy. Their military existed mostly for ceremonial purposes. Humans were different. Humans had turned violence into a science. They studied it, refined it, and taught it to their children, not because they loved war, but because they had learned through thousands of years of bloody experience that peace was fragile, that enemies could appear without warning, that survival was never guaranteed. As they left the War Studies building, Veltorin looked up at the clear blue sky. Somewhere beyond that sky, his comfortable ship waited to take him home. For the first time since arriving on Earth, he wished he had sent a junior diplomat instead. The morning was only half over, and already he had seen enough to fill his nightmares for years. But Colonel Chen was already walking toward the training grounds, and Veltorin understood that the worst was yet to come. The training grounds stretched across a wide valley behind the main academy buildings. Veltorin heard the sounds before he saw anything: shouting, heavy impacts, the sharp crack of weapons firing, and underneath it all, a constant rhythm of boots striking ground in unison. Colonel Chen led him to an elevated observation platform that overlooked the entire complex. From here, Veltoran could see hundreds of cadets engaged in various exercises. Some ran in formation carrying heavy packs. Others crawled through mud under low barriers. Still others climbed walls, swam through cold water, or fought each other with padded weapons. This is the physical conditioning area, the colonel explained. Cadets spend several hours here every day. Veltoran watched a group of young humans run past the platform. They carried full combat gear and weapons. Sweat poured down their faces. Some of them looked ready to collapse, but none of them stopped. None of them slowed down. The gravity feels normal, Veltoran observed. Why do they struggle so much? Because we have set the artificial gravity generators to 130% of Earth normal, Colonel Chen said. And their packs weigh approximately 40 kilograms each, and they have already been running for 2 hours. 2 hours? At increased gravity? Carrying weight? Veltoran's skin shifted to a gray color that indicated disbelief. This would kill a Kirashi. It sometimes injures humans too, the colonel admitted. We have medical teams standing by at all times, but the injuries heal, and the cadets grow stronger. Pain is temporary. Weakness is unacceptable. A young cadet stumbled and fell hard on the running path. Blood immediately appeared on his knee and hands. Before Veltoran could react, 2 other cadets grabbed their fallen companion and pulled him upright. They half-carried him for several steps until he found his footing again. Then all 3 continued running, maintaining their place in the formation. Why did they help him? Veltoran asked. Would it not be faster to leave him behind? We never leave anyone behind, Colonel Chen said. Her voice carried a weight that suggested this was more than just a training rule. A soldier who abandons their comrades is no soldier at all. We carry each other when we must. We die for each other when we must. This is not optional. This is fundamental. They watched the training for a while longer. Veltoran noticed that the instructors rarely shouted praise. They only shouted criticism. The cadets seemed to accept this as normal. They did not seek approval. They only sought to avoid failure. The colonel then led him to an indoor arena where cadets practiced what humans called hand-to-hand combat. Veltoran had never seen anything like it. 2 humans faced each other on a padded floor. They wore protective gear on their heads and hands, but much of their bodies remained exposed. A whistle blew, and they immediately attacked. The violence was shocking in its intensity. They punched, they kicked, they grabbed and threw. They twisted limbs and choked necks. One cadet slammed the other to the ground so hard that Veltoran heard the impact from across the room. But the fallen cadet did not surrender. She twisted, escaped, and counterattacked within seconds. They fight with such anger, Veltoran said quietly. Not anger, Colonel Chen corrected. Purpose. There is a difference. Anger makes you sloppy. Purpose makes you effective. These cadets are not fighting because they hate their opponent. They are fighting because they must learn to survive when technology fails, when weapons are lost, when the only tools remaining are their bodies and their will. An instructor approached the observation area and saluted the colonel. He was an older human with a face that looked like it had been broken and healed many times. His hands were covered in scars. His nose sat at an angle that suggested it had been shattered and never properly repaired. Colonel, Ambassador, would you like a demonstration? Before Veltoran could decline, Colonel Chen nodded. Show the ambassador the survival techniques. The instructor gathered a group of cadets and began a demonstration that made Veltoran's stomachs churn. He showed how to kill with bare hands, how to crush a throat, how to break a spine, how to gouge eyes and rupture organs. He explained each technique calmly, professionally, like a teacher explaining mathematics. Humans have been killing each other with their bodies for over 200,000 years, the instructor said. Long before we invented tools or weapons, our ancestors survived because they were more willing to cause violence than the creatures that hunted them. This instinct lives in all of us. We simply teach cadets to control it and direct it. Do all humans know these techniques? Veltoran asked. No, but enough do. Enough that any human you meet might be capable of killing you with their bare hands in seconds. This is something most species forget about humans. We look soft. We look weak. We are neither. After the combat demonstration, Colonel Chen led Veltoran to the simulation chambers. This, she explained, was where cadets faced their final tests. The chambers used advanced technology to create virtual battlefields indistinguishable from reality. Cadets experienced everything as if it were real. including pain, fear, and death. Today's scenario is a defensive action against superior forces, the colonel said as they entered the observation room. The cadets must protect a civilian outpost from an enemy invasion. They cannot win. The simulation is designed to be unwinnable. Veltoran watched through a large window as a squad of 6 cadets entered the simulation chamber. Immediately, the room transformed around them. They found themselves in a ruined city under a dark sky. Explosions sounded in the distance. Alarms wailed. Civilians ran past in panic. The cadets moved without hesitation. They took positions, organized the civilians, and prepared their defenses. The first enemy wave came within minutes. Veltoran watched the cadets fight. They were skilled and coordinated. But the enemy kept coming. More and more attackers poured into the city. One cadet fell. The simulation registered his death, and he collapsed in apparent agony before disappearing from the battlefield. The others did not pause to mourn. They closed the gap and continued fighting. 2 more cadets died holding a bridge so civilians could cross. Another died buying time for a wounded comrade to reach safety. By the end of the first hour, only 2 cadets remained. They were bleeding, exhausted, nearly out of ammunition. But they did not surrender. They did not give up. Veltoran watched one cadet charge directly into enemy fire with an explosive device strapped to his chest. He destroyed an entire enemy position at the cost of his own simulated life. The final cadet, now completely alone, retreated to the last defensive position and kept shooting until her weapon ran empty. Then she picked up a piece of broken metal and waited. The simulation ended. The cadets emerged from the chamber sweating and shaking. Some of them had tears on their faces. All of them looked drained beyond exhaustion, but they stood at attention and waited for evaluation. The lead instructor reviewed the results. Total simulation time, 3 hours 42 minutes. Civilian evacuation rate, 87%. Enemy casualties, 412 confirmed. This is acceptable. The record remains 4 hours, 17 minutes. You will run the simulation again tomorrow. Veltoran's voice came out as barely a whisper. They will do this again. They will do this until they can hold longer, Colonel Chen said. Until they can save more civilians. Until they can kill more enemies. The scenario never becomes winnable. But they can always do better. And that is the point. Veltoran looked at the young cadets as they filed out of the chamber. They moved slowly, their bodies carrying the weight of simulated death and very real exhaustion. But already some of them were discussing tactics. Already they were planning how to last longer next time. He finally understood something that his reports had failed to explain. Humans did not train to win. They trained to refuse losing. And those were not the same thing at all. The sun was setting over the academy when Colonel Chen led Veltoran toward a building that stood apart from the others. It was older than the rest, built from dark stone that seemed to absorb the fading light. No windows broke its walls. A single door of heavy metal marked the entrance. Above the door, words were carved deep into the stone. Veltoran's translator rendered them as, "Lest we forget. This is the Museum of Human Conflict," Colonel Chen said. Her voice had changed. It was softer now, almost respectful. Every cadet visits this place during their first week, and again, during their last week. It is important that they see what we are capable of, what we have done, what we might do again. The door opened silently, and they stepped into darkness. The first room was small and simple. Display cases lined the walls, each containing objects from humanity's earliest history. Veltoran saw weapons made of stone, shaped by hands that lived 100,000 years ago. He saw bones marked with cuts and breaks that told stories of ancient violence. He saw skulls with holes punched through them. Humans have always fought, Colonel Chen said quietly. Before we had language, we had war. Before we had fire, we had murder. This is not something we invented. This is something we are. They moved deeper into the museum. The weapons grew more sophisticated. Bronze replaced stone. Iron replaced bronze. Veltoran saw swords that had killed thousands, armor that had failed to protect its wearers, arrows and spears and axes designed with terrible efficiency. One display caught his attention. It showed a curved blade with a simple handle. The information plate said it had belonged to a human military leader who lived over 800 years ago. He had used this single blade to help conquer an empire spanning half a continent. Millions had died. This is just one weapon, Veltorin said. How could it kill so many? It did not kill them directly, the colonel explained. But the man who held it gave orders that killed millions. His soldiers burned cities. They slaughtered populations. They erased entire cultures. And he was not unusual. Ambassador, we have had many such leaders throughout our history. They continued through the museum. Each room represented a different era. The weapons grew more powerful. Explosives appeared. Machines of war. Vehicles designed only to kill. Veltorin saw photographs and recordings that showed destruction on scales he had never imagined. One room was dedicated entirely to a conflict that humans called the First World War. Display screens showed trenches stretching across entire continents. Bodies stacked like broken dolls. Poison gases that killed slowly and painfully. Machines that fired projectiles faster than the eye could follow. 20 million dead, Colonel Chen said. In just 4 years. For territory. For pride. For reasons that most humans today cannot even explain clearly. 20 million. Veltorin's translator confirmed the number. It was larger than the population of some Kirashi colony worlds, and this was called the First World War. There was another. The colonel nodded and led him to the next room. This room was darker than the others. The displays glowed with soft light, but the images they showed were anything but soft. Veltorin saw cities reduced to ash. Bodies stacked in pits, children with numbers tattooed on their arms, camps designed not for prisoners but for systematic murder. 70 million dead, the colonel said. Her voice had become flat, emotionless. We killed each other with industrial efficiency. We built factories whose only product was death. We invented new ways to cause suffering that had never existed before. And at the end, we created weapons capable of destroying cities in a single flash of light. She pointed to a display showing a mushroom cloud rising over a ruined city. The information plate listed the casualties. Over 100,000 dead in seconds. Many more died slowly from invisible poisons in the days and weeks that followed. We have used these weapons only twice, Colonel Chen said. Against ourselves. We came close to using them. Many more times. For decades, humanity lived with the knowledge that we could end our own civilization in an afternoon. Some of us still live with that knowledge. Veltorin's legs felt weak. He reached out to steady himself against a display case. Inside the case, he saw fragments of metal and glass recovered from the destroyed city. Small, meaningless pieces of what had once been homes and schools and hospitals. You are a young species, he said slowly. Only 200,000 years of existence, and yet you have killed so many of your own kind. The Kirashi have lived for 12,000 years as a civilization. Our total war deaths across all of history would not fill this single room. We know, the colonel replied. This is why we keep this museum. This is why we force every soldier to walk through it. We must never forget what we are capable of. We must never pretend that we are gentle or kind or peaceful by nature. We are not. We are killers. We are destroyers. The best we can hope for is to point our violence at enemies who deserve it, instead of at ourselves. They walked through more rooms, more wars, more death. Veltorin saw conflicts fought over religion, politics, resources, ideology, and things he could not understand at all. He saw humans fighting in jungles and deserts and frozen wastelands. He saw them fighting in cities and space stations and on the surface of moons. No matter where humanity went, it seemed they brought their capacity for violence with them. The final room was different from the others. It was vast and empty except for walls covered with scrolling text. Names. Millions upon millions of names. They moved continuously. An endless river of the dead. The memorial, Colonel Chen said. Every confirmed death from every human conflict in recorded history. The names never stopped scrolling. Ambassador. They have been moving since this room was built. And they will continue moving for as long as this building stands. Veltorin watched the names flow past. Each name had been a person. Each had lived and hoped and dreamed. Each had been erased by human violence. The scale of it was impossible to truly understand. His mind simply could not process so much death. Why do you show this to your soldiers? He asked. Does it not make them fear their own species? Yes, the colonel admitted. That is exactly what it does. Fear is appropriate, Ambassador. We should fear ourselves. We should fear what we become when we stop holding back. Our cadets leave this room understanding that they are inheriting a legacy of blood. They are not just learning to fight. They are learning to control something very old and very dangerous that lives inside all of us. She turned to face him directly. In the dim light of the scrolling names, her face looked ancient and tired. Every species in the galaxy looks at humanity and sees a young race. Primitive, emotional, easily dismissed. But Ambassador, no species has practiced war as long as we have. No species has refined violence into such perfect forms. No species has survived what we have done to ourselves and emerged stronger. She gestured at the endless names. This is what we have done fighting each other. Imagine what we could do fighting someone else. Someone who threatened our children. Someone who threatened our worlds. Someone who gave us a reason to stop holding back. Veltoran stood in the memorial room for a long time. The names continued to scroll. He tried to count them but quickly gave up. There were too many. There would always be too many. When he finally turned to leave, he noticed something carved into the stone above the exit. More words. His translator processed them slowly, as if struggling with the meaning. Those who do not remember the past are condemned to repeat it. He finally understood what humans truly were. They were not the primitive newcomers he had dismissed so casually. They were the survivors of an endless war that had begun before his species even existed. They had forged themselves in blood and fire across thousands of generations. Every gentle smile, every kind word, every gesture of peace was just a thin layer covering something old and dark and infinitely patient. The Kirashi had built their empire through careful diplomacy and economic pressure. Humans had built theirs by learning to kill each other so efficiently that no outside force could ever hope to match them. Veltoran left the museum in silence. He did not speak for the rest of the evening. He did not sleep that night, and when morning came, he began composing the report that would change everything his people thought they knew about humanity. The journey home took 6 days, but to Veltoran it felt like 6 years. He spent most of the time alone in his quarters, staring at the stars and thinking about what he had seen. His aides grew concerned. They had never seen the ambassador so quiet, so withdrawn. When they asked if he was ill, he simply shook his head and returned to his silence. When his ship finally landed on the Kirashi homeworld, Veltoran did not go to his residence. He went directly to the council chambers and requested an emergency session. This was highly unusual. Emergency sessions were reserved for wars, natural disasters, and threats to the hegemony itself. The council members arrived confused and irritated. The first speaker, an ancient Kirashi whose skin had turned pale with age, looked down at Veltoran from the elevated platform. "You have called us here without explanation, Ambassador. You have returned from a simple diplomatic visit to a minor species, acting as if the galaxy is ending. Explain yourself." Veltoran stood alone in the center of the circular chamber. 12 council members surrounded him, their expressions showing various shades of annoyance and curiosity. He had served the hegemony for over 300 years. He had negotiated treaties with dozens of species. He had faced down threats that would have broken lesser diplomats. But standing here now, preparing to deliver his report, his hands trembled slightly. "Honored Council," he began. "I went to Earth, expecting to see a young species playing at military tradition. I expected to spend a pleasant afternoon watching parades and inspecting weapons. I expected to return with nothing of importance to report." He paused. The chamber was completely silent. "I was wrong. I was catastrophically, dangerously wrong. And we have all been wrong about humanity since the day we first made contact with them." The first speaker's skin shifted to a darker color indicating skepticism. "You are being dramatic, Ambassador. The humans are newcomers. They have been traveling between stars for less than 300 years. Their technology is decades behind ours. Their population is a fraction of the hegemony's. What could possibly, with respect, first speaker, please allow me to finish." Veltoran's voice was firmer than he intended. Several council members exchanged surprised glances. The ambassador had never interrupted the first speaker before. Veltoran activated the holographic projector at the center of the chamber. Images appeared. The academy, the training grounds, the simulation chambers, the museum. He showed them everything he had recorded during his visit. "Humans do not fight the way we do," he said as the images played. "They do not fight to win. They do not fight to survive. They fight as if every battle might be their last, as if extinction is always just one defeat away. He showed them the cadets running in increased gravity, carrying weights that would kill a Karashi. He showed them the combat training, the brutal efficiency with which humans learn to harm each other. He showed them the simulations where cadets died again and again, learning only how to die slower. Their entire military philosophy is built on one assumption, Veltorin continued, that they will face enemies stronger than themselves, that they will be outnumbered, outgunned, and overwhelmed, that they will lose. And yet they plan to make losing so costly that victory becomes meaningless. A younger council member spoke up. This is concerning but not unique. Many species train for defensive warfare. You do not understand. Veltorin's voice dropped low. Humans have been doing this for 200,000 years. Not decades. Not centuries. Longer than our entire civilization has existed. They have been at war with something since before they discovered fire. Sometimes their enemies were animals, sometimes their environment, sometimes each other. They have never known peace, not true peace, not for a single generation in their entire history. He changed the display to show the museum, the weapons, the death tolls, the endless scrolling names. They have killed 70 million of their own kind in a single conflict. They have invented weapons capable of burning entire planets. They have come within minutes of destroying their own civilization multiple times. And Ambassador, they survived. They always survive. That is the terror of it. The first speaker leaned forward. You speak as if humans are a threat to the hegemony. They are far from our borders. They have shown no hostile intentions. That is precisely my point, Veltorin replied. They are not hostile now. They seek friendship and trade. They smile and shake hands and speak of peace. But behind every smile is 200,000 years of violence. Behind every handshake is a species that has learned to kill with bare hands. Behind every word of peace is the knowledge that they could wage war in ways we cannot imagine. He pulled up statistics that he had compiled during his journey home. Training casualty rates, simulation difficulty levels, psychological profiles of human soldiers. A human soldier expects to die in combat. They accept this. They plan for it. They train specifically for situations where death is certain. Our soldiers, they surrender when odds become unfavorable. This is logical. This preserves life. But humans consider surrender worse than death. They will fight when they have no weapons. They will fight when they cannot stand. They will fight when they are the last one alive on a burning battlefield. A council member who had served in the hegemony's ceremonial military spoke up. Surely this is exaggeration. No species is truly so committed to violence. Veltorin turned to face her directly. I watched a cadet simulation. 6 young humans against an overwhelming invasion force. The scenario was designed to be impossible. They knew this. Every cadet who enters that chamber knows they will die. And yet they fight anyway. They died one by one, and the survivors did not mourn or hesitate. They simply kept fighting. The last cadet, a young woman barely into adulthood, fought until her weapons were empty. Then she picked up a broken piece of metal and waited for the enemy to come to her. He let that image hang in the air. The question she was trying to answer was not how to win. It was how long she could last, how many enemies she could take with her, how much pain she could cause before her heart stopped beating. The council chamber had grown very cold. Veltorin could see the colors shifting across the members' skins as they processed what he was telling them. I have a saying that I cannot translate properly, he continued. The closest approximation in our language would be, if we cannot live, we will make sure you remember us dying. The first speaker's mandibles clicked nervously. What is your recommendation, Ambassador? Veltorin deactivated the holographic display. He stood in the center of the chamber, feeling very old and very tired. I recommend that we never give humanity a reason to consider us enemies. I recommend that we treat every human diplomatic request with extreme courtesy. I recommend that we immediately approve all pending trade agreements with Earth, regardless of how favorable the terms are to us. That would be seen as weakness, a council member protested. Better to be seen as weak than to be seen as a target, Veltorin replied. I also recommend that we begin quietly withdrawing all Kirashi military vessels from systems within 3 jumps of human space. No sudden movements, no announcements. simply a gradual repositioning that gives humans no reason to feel threatened. The first speaker rose from the platform, which had not happened in a council session for decades. You truly believe they are that dangerous? Veltorin thought about the museum, the endless names, the cadets learning to die, the colonel's calm voice explaining how humans had nearly destroyed themselves multiple times and emerged stronger each time. First speaker, I believe that humanity is the most dangerous species the galaxy has ever produced. Not because of their technology, not because of their numbers, but because they have spent 200,000 years at war, and they do not know how to stop. They have only ever known how to fight harder. He looked around at the council members, making eye contact with each one. Every other species in the galaxy fights to protect something: territory, resources, pride. Humans fight because fighting is what they are. It is woven into their very nature, and they have refined that nature into something terrible and beautiful and utterly unstoppable. The chamber remained silent for a long moment. Finally, the first speaker spoke. We will consider your recommendations, Ambassador, but I must ask, if humanity is truly so dangerous, why have they not conquered the galaxy already? Veltorin smiled, though there was no humor in it. Because they have not yet decided to. Because they are currently fighting other battles, expanding their economy, exploring new worlds, building their civilization. They are at peace with the galaxy for now. But make no mistake, if anyone gives them a reason to turn their attention outward, if anyone threatens their worlds or their children or their future, they will respond with 200,000 years of accumulated fury. He turned toward the exit. We have been fortunate. First speaker, humanity has chosen to offer friendship. I suggest we accept that friendship with both hands and never, ever give them a reason to withdraw it. He paused at the door and looked back one final time. The humans have a saying for species that foolishly challenge them. They call it learning the hard way. I would prefer that the Kirashi never learn what that means. 6 months later, the hegemony signed the most generous trade agreement in its history. The terms heavily favored Earth. When economists questioned the decision, the council simply said that good relations with humanity were worth any price. And in the academy on Earth, cadets continued to train. They continued to run in heavy gravity. They continued to fight each other with bare hands. They continued to die in simulations, over and over, learning nothing but how to last a little longer. They did not know that somewhere across the stars, an ancient empire had looked at them and felt fear for the first time in 12,000 years. They simply did what humans had always done. They prepared for the next fight.